Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantasy Birds. We are getting closer to the start of the 2023 NFL season. With that, we're getting ready for our fantasy football drafts. Today, I'm back with 3 must-avoid running backs in your 2023 fantasy football drafts. Guys that I am avoiding at their current average draft position. Last week, I did 3 must-avoid wide receivers. Go check that out. But let's not waste your time. Let's hop into 3 must-avoid running backs in 2023 fantasy football. The first guy on my list is Jameer Gibbs, the new running back for the Detroit Lions. Gibbs in the NFL draft goes a lot higher than a lot of people were predicting. Top 12 overall pick to the Detroit Lions. Came as a surprise as they had another pick later in the first round. Probably could have gotten Gibbs at, but they weren't taking any chances. They wanted to grab their guy out of the University of Alabama. My main concern for Gibbs isn't going to be his talent. He's a very talented running back. A lot of things he does well in the receiving game out of the backfield, which in today's game, that's going to lean itself very favorably to fantasy football in PPR leagues. However, there are some serious size concerns with Gibbs at the running back position at the NFL level. Gibbs is only a 200-pound running back as his listed weight. We've seen in the past these smaller running backs, they don't hold up well in the NFL and they don't produce in fantasy as well as some of these other guys with higher BMIs. It's actually a great statistic from 2013 to the 2022 season. All first-round rookies drafted in Dynasty rookie drafts, only one man under 205 pounds has put together 2 top 10 finishes in fantasy football. So we're looking at just around a decade sample size, and only one guy has done that in multiple seasons at 205 or less, and that's going to be Christian McCaffrey, a guy who did go top 10 in the NFL draft to the Carolina Panthers. I don't want to be banking on Gibbs to become the next Christian McCaffrey. I think that's more of an outlier than something that we can prove to be a predictive statistic. Gibbs is going at pick 36 right now, average draft position according to Fantasy Pros, and he's the number 15 running back off the board. So at this draft position, you're relying on Gibbs to be a high-end RB2 for you and get into that RB1 consideration as the season goes on. I don't think that's a very likely outcome for Gibbs this year in Detroit. We got to look at the scenario going on around the Lions this upcoming season. Gibbs doesn't profile to be that huge volume workhorse back. Even at Alabama, in 12 career games at the University of Alabama, he's putting up 151 carries, just over 12 carries a game. Nothing terrible, but not a dominant workload on the ground. And I don't see why we should expect that for the Lions. They signed David Montgomery in the offseason, give him 3 years, $18 million. That's no chump change for a running back in today's game. It's obviously not going to be the elite end of the running back landscape, but $6 million a year, he's going to have a pretty solid role in this offense. And let's look at what Montgomery was able to do in Chicago. In 4 seasons with the Bears, he's getting over 200 carries every single season since he comes into the NFL. He's proven that he can handle a stable share of the offense. And Montgomery was no slouch as the starter for the Bears. I mean, last season, he was top 10 in not only juke rate, but also evaded tackles. So he's proven to have some shiftiness out of the backfield. And for a team like Detroit, which we saw last season, rely on that Jamal Williams type, who is going to be a lot more similar to David Montgomery, and DeAndre Swift is going to be more in the likes of the Jameer Gibbs. We saw Swift kind of got faded out of that offense. A lot of that has to do with injuries. But when they got into the goal line, inside the 5-yard line, Jamal Williams was absorbing every single touch for this offense on the ground. That's why you got him coming out with 17 touchdowns on the season. I believe the same role is going to be given to David Montgomery, and Gibbs is going to be that scat back receiver out of the backfield like DeAndre Swift was supposed to be for the Lions. But injuries and some other things held him back from that role for the team, and they immediately draft his replacement in the first round in Gibbs. I think he's going to be a great player in the NFL. I don't think you're going to see the production in the beginning half of the season for sure. We've seen this in the past with first-round running backs like Jonathan Taylor. The end of their rookie season is really when they get going. So even if you like Gibbs, I don't think he's going to provide value at where he's going in drafts when you can consider just trading for him later on in the season at a much better price for him, when he might have a better understanding of the offense and be more acquainted with that Lions team. There are some pros for Gibbs here. I mean, the Lions have a great offensive line, great offensive package to go along with Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and getting Jameson Williams back in the second half of the season. It's going to be a good-looking team this year, and the only way I'm even thinking about drafting Gibbs is going to be in those PPR leagues. I think he's going to have some serious value there. He's going to be a target haul out of the backfield, but Montgomery is going to eat up those carries inside the goal line and going to be that chain mover for this team. That's why I think there's no reason to pay this high of a price for Gibbs when we haven't seen it in the NFL, especially when there are those weight concerns like we talked about, when we haven't seen any running backs doing that great at that size other than a Christian McCaffrey who's done it pretty consistently outside of the injury-plagued years that he's had. which is also a concern when you come into the NFL at such a low weight, at such a position that takes a beating like this on each and every play you're touching the football. So while I like the prospect, I like the talent going forward, this season I can't get on him. So right now in the 4th round, I really don't want to be touching Gibbs at that position. The second running back I am avoiding this year in 2023 drafts is going to be Javonte Williams, running back for the Denver Broncos. There's no secret, a lot of people were on Williams coming into last season as that lead back for the Broncos with new quarterback Russell Wilson, an explosive offense that they presumed to be happening last year. Didn't end up happening. Javonte had a decent start to the year, but suffers that terrible injury. Very unfortunate injury for such a young, promising running back. This injury might be worse than we had initially thought. Not only does he tear the ACL, but also the PCL and LCL. 3 different tears in that knee. Pretty devastating injury to a guy who a lot of people were drafting pretty highly in the 2nd round. Reports are not great for Javonte. That looking like even if he does start in week 1, he's not going to be a full participant in this offense. I think the most recent example we have is J.K. Dobbins last year. He comes off that brutal knee injury 2 years ago, says he's going to be ready for week 1, comes in hampered in the beginning of the year, and then sits out for a majority of the season. We see these guys with these ACL tears in their knee. It takes them multiple years to recover from these injuries, to get full stabilization, and to be as productive and elusive as they initially were prior to the injury. One of the more notable ACL injuries we've had in the past decade of the NFL is going to be Jamal Charles, Dalvin Cook, and Saquon Barkley. Some great statistics on these guys. These running backs are taking a serious hit to their yards per carry numbers in year 1 following these knee injuries. Jamal Charles, 40% decrease in his yards per carry from his career average that first year back from injury. Saquon Barkley, 20% decrease in that yards per carry. And Dalvin Cook also suffering a hit to his yards per carry mark, first year returning from his ACL injury. So these are 3 notable, very elite running backs in fantasy, suffering terrible knee injuries, and then following that up with a less productive and efficient fantasy season the first year back from injury. And I think the Broncos are kind of expecting the same thing. That's why they bring in P. Ryan on an elevated contract for a backup running back. We saw P. Ryan do some great things in Cincinnati when Joe Mixon was down. When he was thrust into that starting role, he was a great player for Joe Burrow and the Bengals. That's why Samaje Perine was on my sleepers video, why I'm drafting a lot of Samaje Perine this late in drafts. I don't really think he's a handcuff player this year. I think he's going to probably have a majority share of that offense, especially in the beginning of the season, until Javonte gets more comfortable playing on that leg. Our third running back that we're fading this year in drafts, A.J. Dillon, the running back for the Green Bay Packers. Last year, I was drafting A.J. Dillon everywhere I could in the 6th round. He profiled to be that goal line back for Rodgers, as Aaron Jones was going to be more between the 20s, moving the football through the passing game, and then A.J. Dillon was going to eat up the touchdowns in the red zone. That didn't end up happening. This is 2 straight years for A.J. Dillon under 200 carries. We expected a huge increase coming from him in the 2022 campaign. Didn't happen. Not only did the carries not increase, the receptions actually come down pretty significantly. Nearly an 18% drop in his receptions from 2022 to his previous year in 2021. His current average draft position is 89. It's not a terrible pick at that position, but there's just no upside for Dillon in my mind unless Aaron Jones is to sustain a serious injury. At his current rate in the offense, he really is playing second fiddle to Jones, a 28-year-old running back. We expected to lose some volume last season. That didn't end up happening. And Dillon's efficiency metrics really don't warrant him to get any more volume in this offense. Dillon had a 3% breakaway run rate in 2022. That was only good for the 43rd running back in the National Football League. And it's not like he was facing super stacked boxes against him. He only had an 8% stacked box rate, averaging 6.5 defenders inside the box on his carries. This is 45th in the National Football League. So he really just hasn't shown the ability to be an elusive breakaway runner, providing any sort of efficiency metrics we want to be banking on, especially when his counterpart in the backfield, Aaron Jones, posted yet another top 10 finish at the position. Not only Jones is scoring more fantasy points, he's more efficient in his touches, and the target share is obviously going to be much higher as he's a much better receiving back for this team. Even taking out the concerns we have with the volume for Dillon compared to Aaron Jones, the offense in Green Bay could be a lot worse this season. You lose back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers to the New York Jets, and now you have Jordan Love, an unproven quarterback. We don't exactly know how this offense is going to look. It didn't look great last year as they failed to make the playoffs, losing in Week 18 to the Detroit Lions. So with question marks at the quarterback position and in the offense in general, we don't know how favorably these games are going to be for ground and pound running backs like Dillon, who need a sizable lead in the game to really make his mark. This upcoming season, Green Bay is actually projected to finish third in the division, right there with Chicago for last place. Only a 7.5 win total projected by Vegas. So with teams on the rise like Detroit and Minnesota with that offense in that division, we could see some poor game scripts for the Packers, which are going to lend itself more favorably to a guy like Aaron Jones, who, like we talked about, a good route runner, a good pass catcher, who Jordan Love could rely on, with only proven receivers on this team as Christian Watson, who's a sophomore wide receiver who, while he did have some flashes in his rookie year, did show some injury concerns. So Aaron Jones is going to be up there for the leading target share on this team. And with an offense that has question marks, I don't want to be taking the supposed goal line back who doesn't get nearly the touches we expect in the red zone given his frame. So Dillon, I think you're drafting him. There's no real ceiling there aside from that injury to Aaron Jones. And I think you can get much better handcuff opportunities later in the draft, like Elijah Mitchell, Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson. I'd rather have those guys on those offenses than A.J. Dillon behind Aaron Jones and the Green Bay Packers offense. Another guy I was considering putting on this list was Rashad Penny for the Philadelphia Eagles. I really don't want to be drafting any of the Eagles running backs this year. DeAndre Swift and Penny, we know the Eagles do not throw to their running backs. The least targeted running back room in the National Football League last season. Jalen Hurts, we know, a dynamic rusher. When in any sort of trouble, he's just going to use his legs and take off. That's going to almost completely remove the running back from the receiving room in those dump-offs. Outside of the screen game, we haven't seen the Eagles rely on these backs. And with Jalen Hurts being such a dominant goal line running back, I feel like there's no touchdown upside. All these running backs in this backfield for the Eagles. So not only so Swift and Penny, I think, are risky players this year in fantasy. Swift is a very efficient player on his touches. So if they alter this offense in Philadelphia to accommodate him in his receiving role, he could provide some value. But still, I'm leaning away from those guys in Philadelphia and focusing more on Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith. I think the connection they have there through the air is so dynamic with teams worrying about Hurts and his legs. That's where I want to be betting on, and not the running backs for this team. I didn't throw them on the list though because there is an upside to them. Yet again, being one of the best offenses in the league and just having so much touchdown equity that it just brings up everybody's volume. But with the receiving concerns and the Hurts of vulture ability inside the 5-yard line, those are two guys I also want to be fading this year in drafts. Let me know what you think of these guys that I'm avoiding. If you agree or disagree, let me know why you disagree, and ask me any fantasy football questions you have. I love talking fantasy with you guys. That's going to do it here. 3 must-avoid running backs in 2023 fantasy football: Jameer Gibbs, Javonte Williams, and A.J. Dillon. Let me know what y'all think, and thank you guys for coming out. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.